Metal scraped against the glass just inches from my ear. I was lying on the back seat, pressed into the rough carpet, covered with an old blanket, barely breathing. Inside the car it was 10 degrees below zero. Outside, someone was slowly walking around my sedan. A step. The crunch of gravel. A pause. A shadow cut off the light from a lone street lamp, and the interior sank into darkness. The rear door handle jerked once. Then again. Then came a quiet, almost mechanical tapping, knuckles against the glass. And a voice, calm, stripped of all emotion, said, "I know you're not asleep. Open the door." These are 3 true scary stories about highway rest stops. Places where you should never get out of your car. I work in logistics, but that year I had to get behind the wheel of a cargo van myself to cover an urgent contract. Late November. A long stretch of Interstate 70, miles without gas stations or towns. Just forest and a gray ribbon of asphalt. It was close to 3 in the morning. My eyes kept closing. The coffee in my thermos had gone cold hours ago and tasted like burnt rubber. I knew if I didn't shut my eyes for at least 20 minutes, I'd drift off and end up in a ditch. Up ahead, a rest area sign appeared. Just a standard pull-off, a widened shoulder with a couple of trash bins and a concrete restroom set back in the trees. Only one light was working, flickering with a dull yellow sodium glow. I pulled in. There was only one other car parked there. An old dark Buick, sitting in the far corner, right on the edge of light and shadow. I shut off the engine. Silence collapsed around me, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal under the hood. I reclined the seat, set an alarm on my phone, and closed my eyes. About 10 minutes passed. I was in that sticky half-sleep where your brain still catches sounds. Through the haze, I heard snow crunch. Someone was walking. Not from the direction of the restroom, but from the forest that bordered the lot. The steps were steady. Crunch. 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 I opened one eye slightly. The rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness. I figured it was the driver of the Buick stepping out to stretch his legs. Normal enough. I closed my eyes again. But the footsteps didn't fade. They were getting closer. I froze. The sound stopped right by my rear passenger side wheel. I waited for the person to move on, toward the trash bins. But he just stood there. A minute passed. Maybe more. In the absolute silence, I could hear my own heartbeat. Why wasn't he moving? Slowly, careful not to make the leather creak, I raised myself slightly and looked into the side mirror. In the dim, flickering light, I saw a figure. A man in a bulky dark jacket stood with his back to my van, facing the forest. Completely still. Arms hanging at his sides. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he felt sick. Maybe he just needed air. I decided to ignore it. Reached for the door lock and pressed it. The click sounded deafening. At that exact second, the figure in the mirror twitched. The man snapped his head around. I couldn't see his face, just a pale patch under a hood. He heard the lock. I pulled back from the window, pressing into the seat. My phone was on the dashboard. I reached for it. Outside, a new sound began. A faint metallic scrape. Like someone dragging a key along the body of my van. The sound moved slowly, from the rear bumper toward the passenger door. He was walking along the vehicle. I held my breath. The scraping stopped. Now he was standing right outside the passenger door. If I turned my head, there would be nothing between us but the glass. I stared straight ahead. Through the windshield. And then I noticed something. The Buick. I looked closer. No license plates. Not in front, not in back. And the rear left wheel was missing, the car was propped up on bricks. It hadn't driven here tonight. It had been sitting there for a long time. Abandoned. At that moment, the passenger door handle slowly lifted. The man outside was trying to open it. No sudden movement. Just slow, deliberate pressure, checking if it was locked. I realized if I turned on the headlights or started the engine, he'd know I was panicking. So I did the only thing I could think of. I hit the horn. The blast shattered the silence of the night. I kept my hand on the wheel for 5 seconds. Then I let go. Silence. I glanced at the side mirror. No one there. The figure was gone. I exhaled, feeling cold sweat run down my back. Turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed, but didn't start. Panic hit instantly. I tried again. The starter just spun. I was sitting in a locked car on an empty highway. To fix it, I'd have to get out. Pop the hood. Check the battery terminals. 30 seconds, maybe. I looked at the snow around the van. In the glow of the street lamp, I could see a line of footprints leading from the forest to my door. But none leading away. He hadn't left. I looked into the rearview mirror. At the back door glass. Then down at the shadow beneath the van. The vehicle shifted slightly. Barely noticeable. Like someone heavy had just shifted their weight. On the rear bumper. Or on the roof. I didn't get out. I pulled out my phone and called for a tow truck, lying that I was at a busy gas station 10 miles away. When the dispatcher accepted the call, I locked myself in, threw on my jacket, and sat there for 2 hours, gripping a tire iron. Every 15 minutes, the van swayed ever so slightly. When the flashing lights of the tow truck appeared on the horizon, I slammed the headlights on. The beam cut across empty space. I only got out when the driver walked up to my door. We loaded the van. I never once looked toward the abandoned Buick. Later that morning, at the repair shop, the mechanic called me into the bay. "Where were you parked last night?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "At a rest area off the interstate." "Why?" He led me to the back of the van. The fuel line had been cleanly cut. Not torn. Cut with a knife. But that wasn't the worst part. On the layer of road grime across the rear doors, near the roofline, there were fingerprints. Someone had been sitting on top of my van for those 2 hours. Waiting for me to break the one rule. And step outside. I thought the paranoia would fade with time. But sometimes reality proves your fears were justified all along. Part 2. 3 years later, I was moving to another city. My car was packed to the roof with boxes. I was driving alone, trying to make the entire trip in a single day. Around 2 in the morning, my stomach twisted from the cheap energy drink I'd been living on. I needed a restroom, urgently. The GPS showed a service plaza a couple of miles ahead. Not just a pull-off, this was a full facility. A large brick building with panoramic windows, a cafeteria, and restrooms. I turned into the brightly lit parking lot. The place looked modern. And completely empty. No trucks. No cars. Just mine, sitting under a row of harsh LED floodlights. I killed the engine, grabbed my keys, and headed toward the building. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the lighting was bright and clinical. The cafeteria was closed, chairs stacked upside down on tables. The only sound was the low hum of vending machines. The air smelled like bleach and stale coffee. I followed the hallway signs to the restrooms. The men's room was at the very end. I pushed the heavy door open. Clean. White tile. A row of sinks. A large mirror. 6 stalls. The silence rang in my ears. Somewhere, a faucet dripped. I stepped up to a urinal. That's when I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to at first. On the floor, in front of the last closed stall, stood a yellow plastic sign. Caution, wet floor. I finished, walked over to the sink, and turned on the water. The sound echoed off the tile. I lathered my hands and looked up into the mirror. In the reflection, I could see the row of stalls behind me. The door of the last stall, the one with the sign, was slightly ajar. Just an inch or two. And in that narrow gap, right near the floor, I saw the toe of a black work boot. Someone was in there. I froze. The water kept running. I splashed my face, trying to act normal. Probably a janitor. Or another driver whose car I hadn't noticed. But something about it felt wrong. I shut off the water. Silence. Drip. Drip. I reached for a paper towel and looked back into the mirror. The boot was gone. I hadn't heard any movement. No shift. No creak of a door. The person had simply pulled their foot back without a sound. My heart skipped. I dried my hands, tossed the towel in the trash, and headed for the exit. My footsteps echoed loudly against the tile. I grabbed the handle of the heavy wooden door leading back into the hallway and pulled. It didn't move. I pulled harder. Locked. My brain refused to process it. This was a public restroom off a highway. Doors like this don't lock from the outside. They swing freely both ways. I shoved it with my shoulder. A dull thud. It was blocked from the outside. Not just locked, restrained. Like the handle had been tied off to something. Panic rose into my throat. I turned back toward the stalls. The last stall door was now wide open. Empty. I slowly backed away from the entrance, never taking my eyes off the stalls. If he wasn't there, where was he? I looked up. Vent grates. A drop ceiling made of square panels. One of the panels directly above the stalls was pushed aside. A dark square opening. The lights flickered. A loud click sounded from the hallway. Electrical panel. The lights went out. Complete darkness. Thick. Absolute. No windows. Only a thin line of light seeped in from under the locked door. I stopped breathing. In darkness, your hearing sharpens to a painful degree. I heard a faint rustle. Above me. From the open ceiling panel. Someone was climbing down. I didn't scream. I didn't ask who was there. Survival instinct overrode everything. I dropped to all fours and silently crawled into the first stall by the wall, pressing myself into the corner beside the toilet. My eyes slowly adjusted. Then I heard it. A soft thud of boots on tile. He had landed. And then came something I will never forget. In the strip of light beneath the stall doors, I saw two black boots moving slowly along the row. Completely silent. He was stepping heel to toe, like a predator. He stopped at the sixth stall. Pushed the door. Empty. Fifth stall. Empty. He was checking them one by one. Fourth. Third. Getting closer. I was in the first stall. My phone was in my jacket pocket, but I couldn't reach for it. Any movement would give me away. The boots stopped in front of the second stall, right next to mine. The door creaked open. And then he did something that froze the blood in my veins. Instead of opening my stall, the boots turned toward the wall. He dropped to his knees. I saw gloved hands touch the tile floor. He was looking underneath the stalls. A head in a black ski mask slowly lowered to the floor inside the second stall. Then turned. Toward me. Even in the dark, I could feel his gaze. At that exact moment, somewhere out in the hallway, the main door slammed open with a bang. Voices. Loud. Teenagers. Laughter. Running footsteps. The man in the mask froze. Then slowly stood. The boots turned and moved quickly, still silent, back toward the ceiling opening. I heard the faint scrape of movement, the shift of panels as he pulled himself up. A second later, the restroom door rattled violently. Someone outside cursed. The sharp snap of plastic being cut. The door flew open, flooding the room with light from the hallway. "Hey, the lights are out in here," a young voice shouted. I crawled out from under the stall, my whole body shaking. The teenagers in the doorway recoiled when they saw me, a pale, filthy man emerging from the darkness. I didn't say a word. I walked past them, out into the hallway, and looked at the door handle. A thick plastic zip tie hung from it, half cut. I ran to the parking lot, jumped into my car, and floored it. Only after I got back onto the highway did I understand what the "wet floor" sign had been for. It guided people to the first stall. The one directly beneath the open ceiling panel. The one where it was easiest to drop down behind someone. I thought I had learned my lesson. I stopped pulling into empty buildings. I chose open lots where I could see everything around me. But a predator's logic is always one step ahead of a victim's. And that brings me back to that night. The cold glass of the sedan. And the quiet knock on the window. I was driving along an old state highway when the blizzard hit without warning. Visibility dropped to 0. Snow swept across the road so fast the wipers couldn't keep up. Going any farther would have been suicide. My GPS had lost signal miles ago. I was moving blind, creeping forward until my headlights caught a rusted sign. Rest area, 500 feet. I turned onto a narrow access road that led to a wide gravel lot surrounded by dense pine forest. There were no lights. Only darkness and blowing snow. But I wasn't alone. 2 vehicles were parked there. A large motorhome, an old RV with its windows covered. And, a little farther off, a family minivan. The presence of other people calmed me. I parked about 20 yards away, leaving the engine running so the heater would stay on. My headlights lit up the side of the minivan. I leaned back in the seat, feeling the tension slowly leave my body. Then I looked closer. There was a dim interior light on inside the van. Someone was in the driver's seat. A figure slumped forward over the steering wheel. The head rested against the horn, but there was no sound. I frowned. Was he sick? A heart attack? My instinct screamed, "Stay in the car. Lock the doors." But my conscience whispered, "What if he's dying? What if there are kids in the back?" I made the worst mistake I could. I reached for the handle and opened the door. Freezing wind hit my face as I stepped out into the snow. I left my car running, headlights on. I walked toward the minivan. Snow crunched under my boots. "Hey!" I called out. "You okay?" No response. I stepped up to the driver's window and looked inside. The interior light revealed the details. The figure didn't move. I squinted. It wasn't a person. It was an old winter jacket stuffed with rags and newspapers, with a baseball cap pulled down on top. The neck was just a twisted towel. A perfect decoy, if you only saw it from a distance. My brain was still trying to process that when I noticed something else. The snow around the minivan was untouched. No tire tracks. The vehicle hadn't arrived tonight. It had been sitting there for days, slowly getting buried. And then I heard it. A click. It came from the RV. I turned sharply. The door of the motorhome was slowly opening. No light spilled out from inside. No one stepped into view. The door just opened. As if inviting me in. Or letting something out. I didn't wait. I turned and ran back to my car. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and hit the lock button. At that exact moment, my headlights died. The engine coughed, and shut off. I twisted the key in panic. Nothing. Dead silence. The entire electrical system was gone. I looked toward the hood. In the darkness, I could just make out that it was slightly ajar. While I had been walking to the minivan, someone had approached my car from the other side and cut the wires. I was trapped. I climbed into the back seat, grabbed an old blanket, dropped to the floor, and pulled it over my head. 5 minutes passed in absolute silence. Then the footsteps began. Gravel crunching. Slow. Unhurried. They knew I wasn't going anywhere. The steps circled the car. Stopped at the hood. Then at the trunk. A shadow blocked the faint moonlight filtering through the storm. The rear door handle jerked. Once. Twice. Then came a soft, mechanical knock of knuckles against the glass. "I know you're not asleep. Open the door." The voice was calm. No anger. No threat. It sounded like a service worker asking for a signature. I lay under the blanket, pressing my hand over my mouth to keep from breathing too loud. "We're coming in anyway," the voice continued. "The glass is cold. It breaks easy. Open it yourself." I heard a second set of footsteps approach. Heavier. From the other side of the car. The vehicle shifted slightly. Someone leaned against the trunk. "He's not opening," the second voice said, lower. "Give me the tool." Metal scraped against the glass right above my head. And then, somewhere in the distance, back on the highway, a truck horn blasted. Long, deep. Cutting through the storm. Then a wash of powerful light swept across the trees, road maintenance floodlights. A snowplow. Everything around my car went still. Then I heard fast, retreating footsteps. A moment later, the RV door slammed shut. I stayed on the floor until sunrise. I didn't move. Not even when my toes went numb from the cold. Only when the sun came up and the storm settled did I finally lift my head and look outside. The RV was gone. The minivan, with the decoy still inside, remained. I stepped out of the car. My hood had been forced open. The battery cables had been cut clean with bolt cutters. But the worst thing was what I saw when I walked over to where the RV had been parked. There were no tire tracks. No sign that it had driven away. Instead, there were deep grooves in the snow, tow lines. It had been hauled out. They hadn't been living in that RV. It was a mobile blind. A hunting stand. They set the bait. Waited for someone to step out of their vehicle. Disabled it. Then took what they needed. And disappeared. I flagged down a passing trucker and used his radio to call the police. When the patrol units arrived and checked the minivan, one of the officers came over to me. He looked pale. "Did you look in the back seat?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just the front." "You're lucky." He didn't tell me what was in there. But I saw them string up yellow tape around the vehicle. And call in forensics. I never stop at roadside pull-offs anymore. If I'm tired, I drive to the nearest motel, even if I have to bite my own lip to stay awake. Rest areas are designed to make you feel safe. To make you relax. Step out of your car. Stretch. Leave the doors unlocked. But think about it. If you're driving alone at night, and you see a car on the shoulder with its door open, or a figure standing just at the edge of the light. If you were in my place, would you stop? Dirty boots stopped right outside my stall. I held my breath, feeling cold sweat run down my back. The restroom was dead silent, broken only by the low hum of an old fluorescent light. The person on the other side of the door didn't move. Then, slowly, he dropped to his knees. A hand in a thick leather glove slid under the gap. It wasn't searching for anything. The fingers opened, leaving behind a crumpled Polaroid photo on the dirty tile. I lowered my eyes. The picture showed my car. And me, sleeping behind the wheel. It had been taken through the windshield just minutes ago. These are 3 true scary stories about highway rest areas. I work as a night courier delivering medical supplies. My route usually runs between regional hospitals, and I'm almost always behind the wheel from midnight to 6 in the morning. There's a certain aesthetic to that schedule, but by your 3rd year, you start to hate the emptiness of the highways. It was late November. I was hauling a shipment of blood plasma in a Ford Transit van. The road was completely dry, but the cold was so intense the shoulders looked white with frost. Around 3 in the morning, I felt that dangerous heaviness in my eyelids, the kind where your brain starts shutting down in microseconds. I still had about 120 miles to go. I decided to pull into the next rest area. It was a standard truck stop setup. A paved lot surrounded by dense pine forest, a small brick building with restrooms, and a couple of vending machines for coffee. When I pulled in, it was empty. Not a single semi. Only one vehicle, a dark, older sedan parked in the far corner, right at the tree line. Its headlights were off, but thick white exhaust drifted from the tailpipe. The engine was running. I parked closer to the building, right under the only working light. Shut off the engine, grabbed my keys, and went inside for coffee. The place smelled like bleach and old plastic. One of those liminal spaces where time seems to stall. I fed coins into the vending machine. It whirred, pouring hot brown liquid into a paper cup. That's when I caught my reflection in the glass panel of the machine. Someone was standing at the entrance. He hadn't come in, just stood there on the other side of the glass doors. Tall. Wearing a dark puffer jacket. His face hidden under a hood. He was staring straight at me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd stopped to stretch his legs. Maybe he was waiting for someone inside. I grabbed my coffee, turned, and took a step toward the exit. The man immediately turned away and slowly walked off, dissolving into the darkness of the lot. A flicker of unease made me pick up my pace. I stepped outside. The cold air burned my lungs. I looked toward my van, and froze. The dark sedan that had been parked at the far edge was now positioned inches from the driver's door of my Ford. There was no space between the vehicles. I couldn't squeeze through. The sedan's engine was still running. But inside, complete darkness. No dashboard glow. No silhouette of a driver. The survival rule in places like this is simple: never show fear and don't linger. I walked to the passenger side of my van, opened the door, climbed in, and slid over into the driver's seat. First thing I did was hit the central lock. The click steadied my pulse, just a little. I inserted the key into the ignition. Turned it. Nothing. Not even a click. The dashboard stayed dead. I tried the headlights, nothing. The battery was completely drained. I looked out the side window. The sedan was so close I could have touched it if I rolled the window down. That's when I noticed something that sent a chill through me. My hood was slightly open. Just an inch. Someone had cut or removed the battery terminals while I was inside. They knew I'd get out. They had sealed me inside my own vehicle. At that moment, the sedan's headlights snapped on, high beams, blinding me through the rearview mirror. I flinched. When my eyes adjusted, I looked forward. 3 figures stepped out of the tree line into the illuminated patch in front of my van. They didn't run. Didn't shout. They moved in sync, slow and deliberate. One of them held a crowbar. The one in the middle, the tall man in the puffer jacket, walked up to the hood of my van and leaned on it heavily. They didn't try to break the glass. They just stood there, watching me through the windshield. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not a single bar. The metal body of the van and the surrounding forest killed it. The rule of rest areas is simple: don't get out of your car. But my car had become a cage. The man with the crowbar stepped up to the passenger door. He raised the tool slowly and tapped the glass with the metal end. Once. Twice. The sound was dull, but it echoed through every nerve in my body. He wasn't trying to break the window. He was testing my reaction. Then, from the highway came the rumble of a heavy engine. A tow truck slowly rolled into the lot. For a second, relief washed over me. Help. But the tow truck had its headlights off. No flashing lights. And as it turned sideways, I saw there were no license plates. This wasn't help. It was part of the plan. They were going to take the van, with me inside. I realized I had only one option. In a Ford Transit, the cab is separated from the cargo area by a thin metal partition with a small access door. I quietly slid the latch open, squeezed into the dark cargo space, and closed it behind me. Among the boxes of medical supplies, it was pitch black. I lay down on the freezing metal floor, pressing myself against the wall. Outside, I heard metal clank. The tow truck was reversing, hooking onto the front axle. The van jerked, tilted. I grabbed onto the cargo straps. And then, everything stopped. I heard the sedan's tires screech. Shouting. Sharp, urgent voices. The sound of the tow mechanism being released. Then, engines roaring away. I stayed in the cargo area for about an hour before I dared to move. When I finally crept back into the cab, a highway patrol car had pulled into the lot, flooding everything with flashing lights. The officer was just doing a routine night check. When we opened the hood, the battery was still there, but the cables had been cleanly cut with bolt cutters. I thought the worst was over. But a week later, when the van went in for routine maintenance, the mechanic called me. He asked why I had taped a GPS tracker under the chassis. I hadn't. They didn't want the van at the rest stop. They wanted to know where I would take the cargo. I was driving my car from Texas to Oregon. It was a long, exhausting haul, and by the end of the second day, my concentration was slipping. The road had turned into an endless gray ribbon. Around 2 in the morning, I was crossing a desolate stretch of Nevada. The GPS showed the nearest town was still 100 miles away, but a rest area sign appeared ahead. It was a tiny place. No building, just a paved loop, a couple of concrete picnic tables, and a cinderblock restroom lit by a dim yellow bulb. Beyond that, nothing. Just black desert in every direction. There wasn't a single car in the lot. I pulled up right in front of the restroom entrance, leaving my headlights on to light the way. Stepped out. The air was dry and cold. The only sound was the faint chirring of insects in the brittle grass. I walked up to the heavy metal door of the men's room and pulled it open. It gave with a loud screech that echoed across the empty desert. Inside, it smelled like ammonia and dust. 2 urinals, 2 closed stalls, 1 sink with a cloudy mirror. I went to the sink and turned on the faucet. The water came out rusty at first, then cleared. I splashed my face, trying to wake myself up. That's when the sound outside stopped. The insects went silent. A dead, vacuum-like stillness filled the air. Then, behind me, a click. The sound of a stall door locking. I froze, water dripping from my face. I knew for a fact that when I came in, both stall doors had been slightly open. I had been alone. Slowly, I wiped my face with a paper towel, not taking my eyes off the mirror. In the reflection, I saw that the far stall door was now fully closed. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A draft. Old hinges. I turned and took a step toward the exit. I grabbed the heavy metal door and pulled. It didn't move. I pulled harder. Nothing. Locked. Panic slammed into my chest. I braced my foot against the wall and yanked the handle with everything I had. The metal didn't even creak. Someone had slipped a padlock onto the outer latch while I was at the sink. I turned back toward the closed stall. "Hey." My voice came out thin, hollow. "Anyone in here?" No answer. I walked slowly toward the stall and looked under the door. No feet. Empty. I pushed the door open. It swung easily. The lock had closed on its own. No. I had heard the latch. Clearly. Near the ceiling, there was a narrow rectangular window with frosted glass. It was cracked open a couple of inches for ventilation. I dragged a trash can over, climbed onto it, and peered through the gap. The window looked out onto the parking lot. My car was still there, headlights on. But something had changed. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. The silhouette was motionless. Hands resting on the wheel. Staring straight ahead. Into nothing. My breath caught. My keys. I patted my pockets and felt a surge of cold dread. I had left them in the ignition. It was supposed to be a 30-second stop. I hadn't even thought about it. The person in my car slowly turned their head. They couldn't see me through the frosted glass. But their face turned directly toward the restroom. Then they raised a hand. And flicked the turn signal lever. The left blinker began to flash. Amber light pulsed against the concrete wall outside. Click. 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 It was a signal. From the darkness of the desert, just beyond the reach of my headlights, two figures stepped forward. They walked to my car, opened the rear doors, and got inside. They weren't stealing it. They were waiting for someone. And judging by the fact that the restroom door had been locked from the outside, they were waiting for me to stop resisting. Suddenly, the restroom door handle rattled violently. Someone outside was working at the very lock they had just put on. I looked at the narrow window. It was my only chance. I forced myself up and pushed through the opening headfirst. My shoulders got stuck. Behind me, I heard the heavy restroom door creak open. I jerked forward with everything I had, tearing my jacket and scraping my skin against the metal frame. And fell out onto the hard, frozen ground behind the building. I didn't stand up. I crawled into the brush and went still. From inside the restroom, I heard heavy footsteps. Dull thuds as someone checked the stall doors. A minute later, a man stepped around the corner of the building. He looked around, then pulled out a radio. "Clear," he said in a raspy voice. "He's gone." The doors of my car opened. All three of them got out. They didn't take my things. Didn't take the car. They simply walked back into the darkness of the desert. And disappeared. I stayed hidden in the brush until sunrise, too afraid to move. When the sun finally came up, I went back to the car. Nothing was missing. But there was something on the passenger seat that hadn't been there before. A thick nylon zip tie. Pulled tight into a loop. My car had just been bait. They locked the restroom door to force the victim into panic. Then they came inside. I still don't know what they planned to do to me. But I know one thing. I will never step into a roadside restroom like that again. I was driving home after a 3-day business trip. The route cut through a dense national park. Then the rain hit, hard. A full downpour. The wipers couldn't keep up with the sheets of water, and visibility dropped to nothing. Driving any farther would have been suicide. I saw a rest area sign and took the exit. The lot was surrounded by tall pines that looked like a solid black wall in the dark. I parked farther from the highway, shut off the engine, reclined the seat, and fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up from the cold. The dashboard clock read 4:15 a.m. The rain had eased into a fine mist, and the parking lot was swallowed by a dense, almost tangible fog. I needed a restroom. I pulled on my jacket and stepped out of the car. The building was about 50 yards away. I walked through the fog, the sound of my footsteps on the wet asphalt unnaturally loud. The restroom was large, with a row of 6 stalls. I went into the farthest one. That's when I heard it. The entrance door opened. Not slammed, slowly, carefully creaked. Heavy, wet boots shuffled across the tile. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. The person didn't head for the urinals. He was walking along the row of stalls. My heart started pounding. Instinctively, I lifted my feet, bracing my sneakers against the door so they wouldn't be visible from underneath. The boots stopped at the first stall. Then I heard the sound that froze my blood. The man leaned his full weight against the door, testing if it was locked. Locked. 2 steps. Second stall. Pressure. Locked. He was checking them one by one. He was looking for me. The dirty boots stopped right outside my stall. I held my breath, cold sweat sliding down my back. The restroom fell into dead silence, broken only by the hum of an old fluorescent light. The man on the other side didn't move. Then, slowly, he dropped to his knees. A hand in a thick leather glove slid under the door. It wasn't searching. The fingers opened, leaving a crumpled Polaroid on the dirty tile. I lowered my eyes. It was a photo of my car. And me, sleeping behind the wheel. Taken through the windshield. But that wasn't the worst part. I focused on the right edge of the picture. On the back seat of my car, in the darkness, there was a silhouette. Someone had been sitting in my car while I slept. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting down the urge to gag. Outside the stall, the man slowly stood up. I braced for him to break the lock. But instead, the boots turned and moved to the adjacent stall. The door creaked. Closed. The lock clicked. He locked himself inside the stall next to mine. I understood his logic with terrifying clarity. He knew I was there. And now he was waiting. If I opened the door, I'd be alone with him in an empty restroom in the middle of the forest. 10 minutes passed. 20. 30. From the next stall, there was no sound. No breathing. No movement. An unnatural, total silence. My legs were numb, aching. I couldn't stay there forever. I had to run. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, I turned the plastic latch on my door. The click sounded deafening. I shoved the door open and burst out of the stall. I didn't look toward the next one. I sprinted straight for the exit, burst outside, and ran through the fog toward my car. I jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. I slammed the gas and tore back onto the highway. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of a 24-hour gas station. Only there, under bright lights, surrounded by people, was I finally able to breathe. I bought coffee. My hands were shaking. I sat in the car and decided to check the dashcam footage, the camera that recorded the interior. I needed to know when that person had gotten into my car. I rewound to the moment I had fallen asleep. The interior was empty. No one in the back seat. I skipped forward. There I was, waking up. Getting out. walking toward the restroom. The camera kept recording the empty cabin. And then, 5 minutes after I entered the building, the rear passenger door slowly opened. Out of the fog, a man in a puffer jacket climbed into the back seat. The same silhouette from the photograph. He sat down, closed the door, and waited. He hadn't taken the photo. Someone else had. Someone outside had snapped it and slipped it under the stall door, to make me panic and run back to my car. They didn't want to attack me inside the building. They wanted me to return to my car, where someone was already waiting. I only survived because I stayed in that stall too long. The man in the back seat gave up and left just minutes before I ran out. If you were in my place, would you have come out sooner?